about choices, no doubt.
Choices.
Looking at your life from the inside.
That's right.
Life's about choices, no doubt. Looking at your life from the inside. Life's about choices, no doubt.
Speak on it.
Looking at your life from the inside. Life's about choices, no doubt.
West side.
Looking at your life from the inside. Looking out.
Family, it's your boy, Lamont Faison, with You Versus Yourself podcast, where the truth and you collide. If you like my content, please like and subscribe to my channel. And remember, I'm still in the building. Family, it's your boy Lamont Faison with another episode of You Versus Yourself podcast, where the truth and you collide. Listen, today is communication. Oftentimes you hear people say, well, in order to have a healthy relationship, communication is key. Wrong. Effective communication is key. Ineffective communication is why many of us end up in court, domestic violence situations, and getting ourselves incarcerated over ineffective communication. And what do I mean? When you're having conversation with someone, there's a dialogue happening, transactional dialogue. You speak, I speak. And we respect one another when we have those conversations. Our issue is in society is that many of us do not have the coping skills and able to have an effective communication. It is why our divorce rate in America is so high. It is why domestic violence is so high in America. It is why we get ourselves in so many situations because of the lack of coping skills or the lack of communication skills to be able to resolve conflict or to have a dispute. What do I mean? For an example, there's two types of communication. There's the sender and there is the receiver. Both of these individuals have interaction with each other. If I am the sender and I am trying to communicate my message, then it is important for me to understand there are some things that's going to take place that I need to identify or observant of. What does that mean? If 70% of my or our communication is nonverbal, then I have to pay attention to my nonverbal cues when I'm communicating and want to communicate something. It is very important. If I just have my hands folded, if I'm rolling my eyes, I don't have to say anything, but I am saying a whole lot with my nonverbal communication. Then 23% of it is tone. How I present it, how I sound when I say it, what's my demeanor. All of these things matter, the way I speak. Am I aggressive? Am I passive aggressive? Or am I assertive? All of these things have to have attention to detail if we want to have effective communication with the individual that we're speaking to. Now, I want you to pay attention to something because this is very important. When you're dialoguing with someone, you got to be very careful that you don't cut people off. Because our goal is to listen to hear and not listening to respond. What does it look like when people are listening to respond? They cut each other off. Can I raise my hand? I've been guilty of that. I don't really hear you if I'm attempting to speak before you can get the words out of your mouth. So it is very important that we continue to work on this. This stuff does not happen overnight, especially if we've been practicing for several years, our dialogue with people and interrupting them, wanting to be heard. So the question becomes for you today, how effective do you want your communication to be? How important is it to resolve the issue that you're dealing with or the conflict? Here's why I asked that question. If it is important, then everything that I just mentioned is going to be at the forefront of your mind. And that is, I got to watch my body language. I got to watch my tone, which is 23% of the communication. I got to watch my words, which is 7% of our communication. Why are my words important? What I speak matters. Sometimes I have conversation with individuals and they will have a conversation, but throw an insult at the same time, and they don't actually recognize what it is that they're saying. Their speaking is ineffective. They don't have the coping skills necessary, don't have the knowledge to be able to communicate in an effective manner. Now, there's 3 types of communications that I want to talk about. That's passive aggressive. Well, what is passive aggressive? Passive aggressive, especially in a relationship, looks like this. Hey, babe, what's wrong? Nothing, I'm good. But then she doesn't talk to you for 24 hours because she's clearly mad about something, but will not come out and say it. That's passive aggressive. And that's also ineffective. And it will not get us to our ultimate result, and that is to resolve the issue at hand. Now, it's very important to understand that when we're attempting to communicate and resolve our issues, one of the things that we have to remember, it is you and I against the issue, not you and I against each other. And that's what happens a lot when we get into the dispute. We make it about us and each other. We begin to take shots at each other. We begin to personalize it against each other. There's something called character assassination, where you begin to call each other names. You begin to get into the rearview mirror, what I call the rearview mirror effect. You start talking about the past, something that happened 3 weeks ago. Now we're not even focused on the issue. All right. Then we have the aggressive communication style, which that's just what it sounds like. I'm aggressive. And on the other end, the person gets offended. It doesn't appear to be any empathy. It doesn't appear to have any softness to it. And again, that's very important. And then you have the assertive. Assertive is the most effective for when we're talking about conflict and having conversations. Why is that important? Because I am direct. I'm telling you what it is, what I need, whatever it is, I'm giving it to you plain. I'm not manipulating, I'm not sugarcoating, and I'm also communicating in a way where my tone is level, where you can actually engage in a conversation with me, which is very important. The other thing I would mention is there's a book called The 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. When we're talking about communication, what's important is to understand there's 4 agreements that would allow you, if you utilize it and exercise these principles, that will work for you. The first agreement in Don Miguel Ruiz's book is be impeccable with your word. Integrity, basically. High standards, very important. The next one is don't take things personally. When we get in trouble, especially as it relates to domestic violence, we start taking things personally. And then it starts escalating. And then it's escalating and nobody is de-escalating. And next thing you know, we're in a full-blown episode of DV. Then we have don't make assumptions. See, when we're communicating, it's important to not make assumptions because assumptions are not facts. So let me give you an example of that, what that looks like when we're having a conversation. I know you want to be with so-and-so. I know you was doing A, B, and C, but the truth is you don't actually have any facts and you're making an assumption. Somebody asked me one time, what's wrong with assumptions? Because sometimes a person can be dubious. Again, but if you don't have any facts, and any evidence to go along with that assumption, that's going to be a problem. You got a 50% chance of being wrong when you make assumptions. And when you're wrong, that is the problem. You accuse somebody of something and don't have the evidence or the facts of it. Imagine going to court. You only can get convicted over an assumption, and there's no evidence and no facts. That would be a problem. Again, my position is de-escalate, communicate effectively. Somebody said, well, look, Lamont, when you're having a dispute and if you walk away and you take a time out, well, what happens when you come back? If I'm communicating effectively and we had to take a time out because we were escalating, I would approach it this way. Is this a good time to talk? Is this a good time to have a conversation? Why am I doing that? Because the person I am talking to is an adult and they have a level of autonomy to be able to say, hey, yes, this is a good time or it is not. If the person comes back and say, well, you know what, this is not a good time, not a problem. Let me know when it's convenient for you. I would like to have a conversation. You see what I did? I didn't get mad. I didn't get upset. I didn't throw a tantrum. I still put the ball in their court and said, no problem. Let me know when it's convenient for you. If we change our tone, if we change our expression, if we change our demeanor and the words that we speak, we can actually resolve conflict in our relationships. We can be effective communicators. Again, we got to put the ego away. Remember, the ego represents the false self. Today, one of the things that a counselor brought up, which I thought was actually powerful, she said, when we become defensive, our communication turns from effective to ineffective. Because now I'm defensive. Okay, Lamont, well, if I become defensive, and sometimes we do because we're triggered, and I want to be clear, when you're triggered, you're not triggered by that other person. You're triggered by the thing that's going on within you and those underlying issues that you have not actually healed yet. That's why you're triggered. But what's important is staying on course with effective communication. But if you do become defensive and it becomes ineffective, I would say take a time out. How long, Lamont, do we take a time out? We have something called the 48-hour rule. If it's that serious, if it's that extreme, then you have 48 hours to come back. If it's something that you just got upset about and you understand what you did wrong or the other person did wrong, well, we could come back in an hour or two. But what you don't want to do is have this issue, have makeup sex, and still don't resolve the issue, because then it's going to be a problem later. All right? Those are my tips today for effective communication in our relationship. Again, we want to de-escalate. Nobody wants to end up in domestic violence court or incarcerated because we did not use coping skills to de-escalate our situation. Once again, I am Lamont Faison, and remember, being calm is cool.
Hey.